Thank you, everyone. And thank you for being here and for staying. It's a long day with amazing speakers, so it's a pleasure to be here. And thank you, Peter, for the introduction. As Peter said, I will present many of the projects that Peter mentioned, but as Peter said, I'm working with Forensic Architecture, which is a research agency based at Goldsmiths University of London. And we are really a multidisciplinary team. We are a team of architects, filmmakers, artists, investigative journalists, programmers, theorists, scientists, and lawyers who are all working together with different architectural and media techniques against state and corporate violence, so investigating human rights violation and environmental violence. And we usually conduct our work with different NGOs, human rights groups, and we present our work as evidence in different legal and political forums like national and international courts, in parliamentary inquiries, we've presented in the UN, but very much we present our work also for advocacy purposes. So we work with the media, and we also work in exhibitions, in the exhibition context. And I'm very happy to be here also because, as Peter said, we also established a new office here in Germany, in Berlin, which we call Forensis. And just before I go ahead, I just want to warn people, a very small warning that the content of this talk may be distressing for some. So although I will avoid showing graphic imagery, there are mentions of violence. And, you know, please feel free to take a break if you're not feeling like you want to access this right now. I think at the moment that we live in, we really have to budget our emotional labor in this. So, traditionally, forensic architecture, why forensic and architecture? Traditionally, forensic architecture considers or is concerned with the reading of ruins, such as this one, and trying to figure out what happened, right? Was this building destroyed by airstrikes, by artillery, by tank fire, by a bulldozer, by an earthquake? So traditionally, it is a practice of building surveyors. But increasingly, we do not have access to the sites of violations, but we have to rely on the media that is derived from those places and work remotely. As is in this case in the Israeli bombing of the town of Rafah in Gaza in 2014, where the town was heavily bombed, and we had to devise a series of techniques in order to analyze and understand what took place. So questions like, is this the same bombing? We do this by studying the morphology of the bomb cloud and trying to understand whether it matches across the three videos, because a bomb cloud is like a unique signature of a building, like a fingerprint. And then by having those three different videos, this allows us to geolocate the strike by identifying different kind of structures, architectural structures, like a football field or a water tower. And that's the way that we establish the perspective of a photographer or a videographer, and then cross-reference three locations in order to figure out exactly where the bombing happened. And so this kind of technique is only possible because of the proliferation of cheap recording devices and the immediacy of social platforms. So from that little kind of work in establishing perspectives, we are led to this, which is a working drawing. We would usually switch on and off layers in order to read it. Every black line is a photograph or a video that we have geolocated. Every blue line is a bomb cloud that we have located. Every red circle is a crater from an airstrike, from an air-dropped bomb in the town of Rafah in Gaza, and every orange circle is artillery strike. So this is the mess that is made only in one day of bombing by the Israeli Defense Force in August 2014. And we call this collection of evidence the way that we analyze images, the architectural image complex, which is a set of spatial and temporal relationships of different pieces of evidence. We use 3D models in order to figure out how do they relate to one another. And at the core of our work and our practice, let's say, there is this relationship between media and architecture, space and media. Our practice is one where we are kind of unpacking mediatized space back into its 3 and 4 dimensions and perhaps trying to work backwards with the distortion that happens through the lens as the photograph is compressed into a two-dimensional space. So understanding how a media object also becomes a political object when it gains life and it is being disputed in different forums. We work very much with open source materials. So both the techniques, the code, as well as the objects of investigation themselves. For example, we scour online platforms and find photographs of fragments of bombs. We measure and study their distortion and try to figure out how they best fit with one another and the blueprints of those bombs. Like in this case, where the drawing of this M4000 was inadvertently leaked by the Russian Foreign Ministry in order to prove that their Syrian allies at the time could not have been responsible for another chemical attack in Khan Sheikhoun. And they were calling those witness accounts fake news. So we had to kind of look at those drawings and find the way that those little fragments fit within that blueprint in order to prove that it was in fact the Syrians who dropped this bomb, and they were the ones responsible for the chemical attack. In another occasion, we discovered the presence of American soldiers in Cameroon in a military base where torture systematically takes place according to witness testimony. Here again, we worked with Amnesty International because the American soldiers kept their location tags on and their privacy settings quite loose on Facebook. And so we have this footage of American soldiers training the Cameroonian special forces teams in the use of night goggles, and right around the corner, it's the sites where torture is taking place. So this kind of work helps really enforce accountability and ask questions of how are those Western countries also involved in these places. But beyond looking at faraway places, what I wanted to do today is focus a little bit more on cases that are happening right here in Europe, and how we investigate very often the human rights violations that are committed in our kind of front doors. In this investigation, we worked with the Syrian artist Amal al-Jakut, who on the 28th of October 2015 took this perilous trip from the coast of Turkey to Greece, to the island of Lesbos on a small wooden boat. After she was refused her visa, so she took the smuggling route, so she was smuggled in. And she filmed her whole journey with an underwater camera attached to her wrist to show her partner who was waiting for her here in Germany. And she did this not knowing that this trip would result into one of the most deadliest shipwrecks of the Aegean Sea's most recent history, with more than 43 people who died. I would really encourage you to see all of this investigation in full, and also Amal's own film that she did with her partner, Khaled Abdulahed, and also Pong Film, which is called Purple Sea. It is a masterpiece. And so I also want to kind of encourage you to think about this work as an invitation to sort of witness together the sort of incidents that are happening right outside our doors in our borders. Her footage is one of the most unique documentations of this type of journey that I have ever come across, at least, and I think you might agree with me. She captured the whole journey as well as the moment of the shipwreck that you're about to see, so this is the moment of caution. And her friend and co-traveler was also transmitting their location with, on WhatsApp from a phone in order to share it with friends and family who were following them. And so based on this location, we were able to establish the exact timing and a location of the shipwreck. And soon after this moment, the phone got wet and stopped transmitting. But she asked us, so it is from that moment that we are establishing this. It's right inside the Greek territorial waters. And she asked us to look at other perspectives that could help complete her own vision and to paint a clearer picture of what happened as well as the subsequent kind of rescue operation, which was somehow too late. So there was, we looked and found a short video and a few images from Frontex, Europe's border agency, who had a boat there patrolling the border. We had a head-mounted GoPro camera from one of the captains of the Greek Coast Guard ship. We also had footage from the artist Richard Moss, who happened to be at the coast of Lesbos at the time and was working on his film on kind of a military aesthetic of the border. And he was using this military thermal lens, which was also telescopic, so he was able to zoom in and capture this incredible perspective as well. And we also had footage from activists who were stationed in Lesbos, kind of zooming into their phones, as well as journalists such as Michael Konate, who jumped also at some point onto the boat of a fisherman who was also involved in the rescue and filmed the whole rescue operation. And finally, we had AIS data, which helped us anchor the footage to accurate locations and the timings, and to locate where the shipwreck was happening and how it was also drifting with different wind patterns of the day. So we worked with this abstract gray footage and tried to locate it in a 3D model by observing distinct features again of the landscape on the shores, and by piecing together these perspectives, we reconstructed the timeline of the events and, in essence, kind of analyzed the rescue operation. And it is very important to say here that Frontex claimed to have rescued 120 people, and so they were deeming this a very successful rescue operation. But as we started to investigate, we realized that both Frontex and the Greek Coast Guard were incredibly ill-equipped and undertrained to the rescue, for rescue. And it is important also to note that this was at the height of what we now call the long summer of migration in 2015, where thousands of people crossed into Greek seas, and the whole of Europe was looking at this exact strait of sea between Greece and Turkey. So the people who actually had a crucial role in rescuing were lifeguard volunteers from an NGO group called Proactiva Open Arms, as well as local Greek and Turkish fishermen who just kind of jumped on the boat and helped. However, the Greek and European states have ever since accused those NGOs and the civilians who helped in the rescue operation that they are assisting in smuggling, so in essence criminalizing them. I'm going to play a couple of segments for you to see also the quality of the footage, and then maybe we take it from there. This is from a moment where they're discussing, and you'll hear the voice of Oscar Camps from Proactiva Open Arms, the rescuer, and they're discussing the Frontex helicopter that is above the scene.
El helicóptero seguía en estacionaria en el mismo sitio y solo sé que estaba grabando, como mucho estaba grabando vídeo. Pero no hizo nada, molestar, porque el aire del vuelo en estacionario hacía que el agua saltara por todas partes. No se mojaban, solo alargaban un brazo, nadie fue al agua a subir a niños, no se nos ayudó nadie. Fue muy policial su actuación. Estoy seguro de que ninguno de los griegos tenía ninguna formación en primeros auxilios, cero formación en primeros auxilios.
Footage from the Greek Coast Guard confirms that the Proactiva rescuers had to go on board the Coast Guard vessel to perform basic CPR. We were later told by one of the Greek captains operating that day that the Coast Guard staff had received CPR training from volunteers, but not as part of the official government training. So a few days before the shipwreck, the European and Turkish authorities published a joint action plan to restrict migration across Europe's eastern border, which later in the year resulted in the EU-Turkey deal that many of you might know. Ever since then, the border has been increasingly militarized, with NGOs being more and more criminalized. So nature is weaponized again and again against migrants who are seeking refuge here, and not only by the structural incompetence in rescue operations, but also by actively conducting illegal pushbacks, which is the next case I'm going to show you. Pushbacks or refoulements is this practice of taking refugees across borders outside Europe against their will and without really processing their asylum claims, which is obviously illegal. So we have conducted several investigations of pushbacks at the Evros-Meric border, which is at the north between Turkey and Greece. It's the only land border, but it's actually a river. And one of these cases is the example of Ayşe Erdoğan, a primary school teacher who was traveling with two friends, Kamil Yildirim and Talim Niksar, after they were fleeing persecution in Turkey. They entered into Greece through the Evros-Meric River in May 2019, and they sent GPS pins to their family, which gives us a very accurate trace of their location. They then sent photographs and videos broadcasting their request for asylum, and we were able to geolocate some of this footage, like this image, which is essentially outside a government building, a Greek government building. So we could prove that they were definitely inside Greek territory. They then handed themselves in, as they should, and were taken to a police station in Neo Chimonio, where they were, when they sent this final kind of location pin. And then they were picked up by border guards in Turkey, near the town of Seremköy. And Ayşe found herself in one of the most notorious prisons in Turkey. And of course, in other circumstances, we don't have such compelling evidence with geotagged locations and images to work with. In fact, the Evros-Meric River that you see here is a militarized zone, so it's very difficult to get any evidence out of there. And because when migrants are arrested and their phones and personal documents are usually confiscated or thrown in the river, so there is usually very little evidence of this practice beyond witness testimony. So in November 2019, we traveled to Athens to interview 4 witnesses who had experienced pushbacks, and we used architectural and gaming software to help witnesses reconstruct their experiences only from memory. The witnesses described buildings they were held in, vehicles they were transported in, the attire and gear of the operatives pushing them back, as well as the river landscapes that they had forced to cross, as well as the weather conditions that they were forced to do this in. So this process is one that is a methodology that we developed that we call situated testimony, which means that we use architectural models because somehow memory is spatial. And so when we ask questions about the space and when people reconstruct the spaces where this violence has happened, it really helps them remember more details of what took place and externalize that memory so that other people can also understand how something like this developed. And this memory was really helped more and more as the scenes became more visceral and immersive. So later, using satellite images, maps, official documents, and also videos and photographs from these sites, from field work, as well as meteorological data, we were able to corroborate those testimonies and identify some of those places and the actors involved, which included Greek police, border guards, and military, and sometimes civilians, as well as foreign-speaking personnel. So this was the case of Fadi Alali Al-Jazim, for example, a Syrian man that had the refugee status in Germany and traveled by plane to Thessaloniki and then there to Evros in order to find his brother who was missing. Fadi was illegally arrested, detained and expelled to Turkey while his documents were confiscated. After unsuccessful attempts to regain his passport through the German embassy in Istanbul, he tried to enter to Greece and subsequently in the EU and was pushed back more than 10 times until he finally arrived in Greece, where he spent 2 years in hiding. Fadi's asylum, thankfully, was finally reinstated in December 2019, and he currently, again, resides legally in Germany, but his brother is still missing. He reported to us that he heard people speaking German in the police stations, a language that he recognized well because he was living here, and he also took German classes when he was in his kind of refugee status here. So he reported that these people who spoke German were also involved in the pushback operation. This is the case of Kuzi, who is using a pseudonym, a Turkish national who was pushed back 5 times. He was beaten and tortured at the border, so he learns not to come back again, quote unquote. Needless to say that neither of those witnesses had access to a lawyer. or they were given any opportunity to apply for asylum. They were exposed to the cold, they were exposed to starvation, and their lives were put at risk simply by being pushed back. We were also able to analyze the only footage that has surfaced from this pushback, which was actually obtained by Der Spiegel, again from here, from an anonymous source, which captured people being moved from the Greek banks to the Turkish side of the river. And we were able to geolocate, is this moving? Yes. We were able to geolocate these by analyzing the sun's orientation, by finding distinct features on the landscape, and by measuring the width of the river. So we found that it was about 300 meters away from a Greek watchtower. And so it's important to note that this practice is not a one-off mistake. It is routine, systematic, widespread. And at this moment, Greece is utterly denying that it is doing it, and the European countries very often turn a blind eye. So I will conclude with a case that perhaps some of you know, but perhaps it's good to look again at this case, because finally, even when people arrive in Europe and build a life here and a future here, and their kids become European citizens, sometimes, often, they still feel unsafe. In 2016, we started investigating the killing of Khalid Yozgat here in Germany, in Kassel, not very far from here. And as many of you might know, Khalid was the 9th out of the 10 murders conducted by the NSU, the National Socialist Underground. This, for any of you who don't know, this neo-Nazi group that was active between 2000 and 2010. And we were invited by a people's tribunal that called themselves Unraveling the NSU Complex to investigate this murder, because there was a very particular person, an intelligence agent called Andreas Temme, who happened to be in the internet cafe where the murder took place. A few weeks after the murder, Temme was arrested and was made to reenact on camera the path that he had taken while leaving the internet cafe, in order to prove that what his involvement was. And with this reenactment, he claimed not to have noticed Khalid's murder, not to have noticed anything suspicious in this place. So we consider this reenactment, Temme's reenactment, to constitute a piece of original physical testimony. So by orienting our investigation around this video, we examined not the circumstances of the murder as a whole, but actually the way, whether Temme was lying, whether he was committing perjury through his actions on camera. Again, we reconstructed the shop from this video and other pieces of footage and evidence that kind of came out from those files. And we rebuilt it both in a 3D model, but also as a physical model, because we needed to ask very specific questions. I will let you see the transformation between the three-dimensional model and the physical space. And we built this at the House of World Cultures in Berlin, that gave us the opportunity to kind of conduct a series of investigations. The model, as you will see, is abstracted. We didn't have to recreate every space. It's a one-to-one installation, and it is really meant to help us experiment with a series of questions. I will quickly run through it because I'm also running out of time. So it's a set that helps us figure out a series of questions. We first reenacted Temme's reenactment in order to understand his movements within the space, questions of timing, and whether it was possible for him to be out of the cafe when the killing happened. And then we asked a series of questions that had to do with his perception. He said he didn't hear anything, he didn't smell anything, he didn't see anything. And so we questioned each one of those assumptions. So we worked with a weapons specialist that fired the same gun with suppressor. This a bit, it's not as loud as it is usually. the loudness matters, because we're really measuring the volume, and then what we're doing is playing it in the real cafe, in the one-to-one installation, in order to measure how the space itself both captures and reflects sound, and how the sound would have been perceived from the position where Teme was sitting on PC2 on the back of the cafe. We worked here with an acoustics expert from Anderson Acoustics.
Measurement 1, high-level gunshot. Start now. Measurement end. Measurement 2, gunshot. Start now. Measurement end.
And it's important to say that the sound was really, really loud. I mean, when you were in that space, it was really a joke to not be able to have heard it. And so also the computer simulation helps verify the fact that it definitely must have been perceptible. It was enough to wake someone from sleep. The second experiment we did was on smell. We simulated the cloud of the smell of ammonia, which comes out of gunshots. Teme said famously that he was a gun enthusiast. He would have recognized the smell of gunpowder anywhere. And so we really mapped out that cloud of perceptibility through the smell. And again, he would not have missed this. And of course, we simulate the moment that the door opens and closes when the killer comes in and out, and the way the air is mixed. Here, we're working with the fluid dynamics specialist, Dr. Salvador Navarro Martinez from Imperial College. And finally, we are simulating his vision, because essentially Teme said that while he was leaving the internet cafe, he couldn't find Khalid. And so he looked everywhere. He opened the door looking for him, went outside looking for him. And then because he couldn't find him, he took a coin and placed it on the front desk in order to pay before he left. The front desk, behind the front desk, was where Khalid was lying dead. This is where his father found him. And so it was really a shock to imagine a man as tall as 1.9 meters, I think, leaning over a short desk, not seeing a person lying on the other side. So in this small internet cafe, you have all sorts of actors that are involved. You have a Secret Service agent who is representing the kind of the German police. You have the neo-Nazi group that is conducting the murder, and you have members of diaspora from the migrant communities. Khalid was from Turkish background, but there were also others inside that internet cafe, all kind of tangled in this small 77 square meters. So I wanted to finish with this diagram, and I don't have a lot of time, and I could be speaking on this diagram for half an hour, but I won't. Because essentially this is the proposition of not only how we conducted this investigation, but any counter-investigation. We call counter-investigation one where we are not being kind of commissioned by state authorities, but we are working really within civil society. So we break up this diagram. This is the life story of the project, and we break up this diagram in legal forums, political forums, civil society forums, cultural forums, and the media. And so this is the form that a project needs to take. If we were working just with the police, we would be commissioned by the police and present our evidence in court, and that would be the end of it. It would be a linear process. But instead, we are working with the People's Tribunal, who themselves were a coalition of different initiatives, like the 6th of April initiative, or Alliance Against Racism, or Antifa, etc., who all came together and formed this People's Tribunal in order to investigate the wider relationships of racism and neo-Nazi terror that came, that are more entangled than a simple act of killing, right? They were able to ask us to investigate because there was a leak in the media that revealed documents such as the reenactment that I showed you earlier. And then we were also able to create this installation through a cultural institution, the House of World Cultures. we were then able to, we conducted our investigation, we presented it in a press conference, which created an interest, and then we were asked to submit our evidence in the national parliamentary inquiry. After this, we were also we were also invited to present in court, but I don't have time to explain that for technical reasons we ended up not presenting there. We presented our final results in the People's Tribunal, and then we were also happy to exhibit this work in Documenta 14, which was in Kassel, just a few blocks away from where the murder took place. And that became a really potent and incredible space, because our collaborators from the People's Tribunal invited journalists, invited MPs, politicians, even police detectives who came in and saw the investigation in an exhibition context. Also, Documenta has millions of visitors coming in, so that became the way that people could access an investigation like that. And because of that, we were then asked again to present our work in the Hessen parliamentary inquiry in front of Andreas Temme, who was asked to respond. I won't bore you with his response. He just said something like, oh, they don't have the copyright to use my image here. Something silly like that. But what's interesting is that just before we were able to present in the Hessen parliamentary inquiry, the CDU, the Christian Democrat Party, published a counter-report to our report, trying to say that our report is spurious, that it's unfounded. And so here you have a political party which publishes an uncredited report against the scientific report, which is fully credited, which is peer-reviewed, etc., trying to block it from being presented. And that's because the CDU at the time, in 2006, was quite close with the Secret Service agency. So anyway, I ran out of time, but the reason why I'm showing you this is because this, as a diagram, is the form that a counter-investigative project needs to take. This is what we're doing also now in Berlin, that we've established the new office in an attempt to think about how we could be working together, not just one agency, but how could we think of an investigative commons where different groups offer what they can, and we use different forums in order to create political pressure points at the moment where some of those routes are blocked. This is what, the Hong Kong protesters would say, we flow like water, right? And so that is the proposition to you, how to not only witness together, but also how to investigate together. I will leave it here. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, we've seen some applications of 3D and virtual spaces today, but this is, of course, heavy stuff. Was there a special reason that you chose Berlin as the spot for the first, new organization or new part of the organization from forensic architecture?
Well, I mean, there's a series of reasons. We have great collaborators there. Mm-hmm. We have people that have invited us to work with them, so we're also in the same space as ECCHR, the European Center for Constitutional and Human Rights, who's doing exceptional work in legal accountability as well. But it's also because we wanted a European base, and the UK is no longer in the EU. Mm-hmm. And most importantly, because we think that we can get amazing people to work there. Because it is much easier to get people from all over the world to come to Berlin, to get them visas, for example. And we think that everyone who comes from a different background also brings a different type of intelligence.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay. Any questions from the audience already? There's a hand up over here.
Hi. Yeah, thanks very much for this presentation. I think you're doing a very important work, and it was quite impressive. I have two questions, short ones. The first one is, how are you funded? And the second one is, in a world full of horrors as today, how do you pick your projects you're working on?
Sure. We are funded by three types of streams. One is academic funds, academic grants, basically, were funded by the European Research Council, for example, or different human rights and technology grants that usually, you know, we're going through a grant application, we're making proposals, and we get grants sometimes for specific projects. Sometimes we're commissioned by our partners, and that also sometimes comes with a fee, like different NGOs, like Amnesty, etc., might pay us some money, but it's never enough usually to do not only the work, but also the research, right? Because any project should be not only answering the specific questions that are set by this series, by what we're trying to figure out, but also experiment in new techniques and new methodologies. And so that's the reason we need kind of different types of funding that allow us to do that instead of just this singular frame that is, you know, we wouldn't be service providers where we're just commissioned to do something very specific. We also get funded by our exhibitions and presenting in different museums and art galleries sometimes. So that's the way that we're funded, and we choose our projects also in a similar fashion. We are trying to think of, we're trying to kind of figure out which projects have a political urgency. It really varies. It depends who has asked to work with us. We usually are looking for local partners. We don't kind of land from London to faraway places and try to fix anything. We need to be invited, and we usually work with people who have a really grounded understanding of what's going on there. And we also try to figure out projects where we could develop new techniques and methodologies, because our mandate is really to develop that and to give it also for other people to use, right? And so that's another thing that we keep in mind, to be able to do something differently so that others can also take it and experiment with it.
We have to keep Q&A a bit shorter because we're pretty out of schedule. I just would have one last question. Are you already involved in analysis and research concerning the war in Ukraine?
I mean, we will probably do something with it. It's too soon to tell in this context, but I'm sure that there will be a lot that needs to be done. And it's also very important that there's others who do a lot of work in this as well. So everything that I've shown, all of the techniques, all of the methodologies, they're all open source. And most of our videos are also tutorials on how you do it yourself. So,
okay, there's something to learn. Then, Christina Varvia, thanks a lot for being here from Forensic Architecture.